The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have in Pia Rodriguez's trembling hands. Inside were documents that would shatter everything she thought she knew about her family, her service, and the woman who raised her. What started as a routine visit to the VA clinic in Phoenix, Arizona, would uncover a web of deception that had been spinning for 3 years. While Pia suffered in silence, her PTSD untreated, her benefits stolen by the one person she trusted most. This is the story of how a daughter's love became her mother's weapon, and how the truth can sometimes be the most devastating casualty of war.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Pia Rodriguez had always been good at compartmentalizing. It's what made her an exceptional combat medic during her 2 tours in Afghanistan, and it's what helped her survive the nightmares that followed her home to Tucson in 2019. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet efficiency of someone who had seen too much, too young. Her dark hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail, her brown eyes constantly scanning for threats that existed more in memory than reality. The morning of March 15, 2024, started like any other. Pia woke up in her cramped studio apartment on the outskirts of Tucson, her sheets soaked with sweat from another nightmare about the IED explosion that had killed her unit commander, Staff Sergeant Monica Chen. The dreams had been getting worse lately, more vivid, more frequent. Sometimes she could still smell the acrid smoke and hear Monica's voice calling her name in those final moments. She'd been meaning to seek help for months, but every time she called the Phoenix VA Medical Center, she was told there was a waiting list. "Your benefits are being processed," they'd say. "We'll call you back." The callback never came. Pia worked 3 part-time jobs to make ends meet. Morning shifts at a local diner called Maria's Kitchen, afternoon hours at a veterinary clinic, and weekend nights as a security guard at a shopping mall. None offered health insurance. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent 18 months patching up wounded soldiers in a war zone, and now she couldn't afford to heal herself. Her mother, Carmen Rodriguez, lived just 20 minutes away in a modest ranch house in the Catalina foothills. Carmen was 52, a former school secretary who had raised Pia alone after her father died in a construction accident when Pia was 12. She was small and soft-spoken, with graying hair she kept in a neat bun, and a tendency to worry about everyone except herself. Carmen had been Pia's rock through everything: her father's death, her decision to enlist at 18, the difficult readjustment after her discharge. "Mija, you look tired," Carmen would say every time Pia visited, which was usually twice a week for dinner. "You need to take better care of yourself." Pia would nod and change the subject. She couldn't bring herself to worry her mother with the details of her struggles. Carmen had already sacrificed so much, working double shifts to pay for Pia's school clothes, missing her own social life to attend every track meet and school play. The last thing Pia wanted was to become another burden. That March morning, Pia was running late for her shift at Maria's Kitchen when her phone rang. The caller ID showed Phoenix VA Medical Center. "Ms. Rodriguez, this is Sarah Mitchell from the Veterans Benefits Administration. I'm calling because there's been some confusion with your disability claim file. Could you come in this afternoon? We need to verify some information." Pia's heart skipped. Maybe her benefits were finally coming through. Maybe she could finally get the help she needed. What kind of information? "I'd rather discuss it in person. Would 2 p.m. work? Building C, 3rd floor?" Pia called in sick to the veterinary clinic and made the 2-hour drive to Phoenix and her aging Honda Civic, the air conditioning broken and the radio stuck on a Spanish station that played the same ranchera songs over and over. She tried to stay optimistic, but something in Sarah Mitchell's voice had sounded off, too careful, too measured. The Phoenix VA Medical Center was a sprawling complex of tan buildings that seemed to stretch forever under the desert sun. Building C was newer than the others, with tinted windows and a parking lot that was surprisingly full for a weekday afternoon. Pia found a spot in the back and walked across the scorching asphalt, her combat boots, the only shoes that triggered flashbacks, clicking against the pavement. Sarah Mitchell turned out to be a woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. Her office was small but organized, with a desk covered in neat stacks of files and a single photo of what looked like her family at the Grand Canyon. She gestured for Pia to sit in a chair across from her desk. "Thank you for coming in, Ms. Rodriguez. I know it's a long drive from Tucson." Sarah's voice was gentle but professional. "I need to ask you some questions about your disability benefits application." "Of course. Has it been approved?" Sarah paused, consulting the file in front of her. "That's what we need to clarify. According to our records, you've been receiving disability payments for PTSD since January 2021. The payments have been direct deposited to a Bank of America account ending in 7342. Pia felt the world tilt slightly. "I'm sorry, what? I haven't received any payments. I've been on a waiting list for treatment. I don't even have a Bank of America account." Sarah's expression grew more serious. She pulled out a form and turned it towards Pia. "Is this your signature on the original application?" Pia leaned forward to examine the document. The signature looked like hers, almost, but the handwriting was slightly different, the P in Pia more rounded than she usually made it. Her address was listed as her mother's house in the Catalina foothills, not her studio apartment. This isn't right," Pia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I mean, it looks like my signature, but I never filled out this application. And why would my benefits go to my mother's address?" Sarah made a note in the file. "Ms. Rodriguez, I need to ask, who has access to your personal information? Social security number, military records, that sort of thing."
The question hit Pia like a physical blow. There was only one person who had all of that information, who had helped her organize her discharge paperwork, who had access to her mail when she was between apartments after returning from overseas. "My mother," Pia said, the words feeling foreign in her mouth. "But she would never. She's been taking care of me since I got back. She's the one who's been encouraging me to seek treatment." Sarah's expression was carefully neutral. "I understand this is difficult, but according to our records, someone has been receiving $1,847 per month in disability payments on your behalf since January 2021. That's $66,492 over the past 3 years and 2 months. The number hit Pia like shrapnel, nearly $70,000. While she'd been working 3 jobs, skipping meals to pay rent, lying awake at night fighting demons she couldn't afford to treat, someone had been collecting money meant to help her heal. "I need to make some calls," Sarah continued. "This appears to be a case of benefits fraud, which is a federal crime. I'm required to report this to our Office of Inspector General for investigation." Pia's hands were shaking now. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the small office too cramped. She could feel her breathing becoming shallow, the familiar signs of a panic attack beginning to build. "Ms. Rodriguez, are you okay?" I need some air." Pia stood up too quickly, her vision swimming. "What happens now?" "We'll launch a formal investigation. In the meantime, the payments will be suspended while we determine what happened. I'm sorry, but I have to ask, do you have any proof that you weren't aware of these payments? Bank statements showing your financial situation, employment records, anything that would demonstrate you weren't receiving this money?" Pia thought about her 3 part-time jobs, her overdrawn checking account, the eviction notice she'd received last month that she'd managed to fight off by borrowing money from a friend. She had plenty of proof that she wasn't living like someone receiving nearly $2,000 a month in benefits. "Yes," she said, "I can get you whatever you need." Sarah handed her a business card and a manila envelope. "These are copies of all the documents in your file. You'll want to review them carefully. And, Ms. Rodriguez, I'd recommend getting a lawyer. If someone has been fraudulently collecting your benefits, you're going to need legal representation to sort this out." The drive back to Tucson was a blur of desert highway and spiraling thoughts. Pia pulled over twice, once to throw up at a gas station and once just to sit in her car and try to process what she'd learned. The manila envelope sat on her passenger seat like an accusation. By the time she reached her apartment, the sun was setting behind the Tucson mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded her of the sunsets she'd watched from the forward operating base in Kandahar. But those memories, once painful, now felt like a refuge compared to the betrayal she was facing. She spread the documents across her small kitchen table under the harsh light of a single bulb. There was the initial disability application with her forged signature, bank statements showing regular deposits to an account she'd never opened, medical records from VA appointments she'd never attended, even a change of address form routing her mail to her mother's house. The most damning document was a power of attorney form, supposedly signed by Pia, giving Carmen Rodriguez the right to handle her daughter's VA benefits and medical decisions. The signature was perfect, too perfect. Pia realized her mother must have practiced it, tracing her handwriting until she could replicate it flawlessly. As the full scope of the deception became clear, Pia felt something she hadn't experienced since that day in Afghanistan when the IED had exploded 20 feet from her position. The complete dissolution of everything she thought she could trust. Her mother, the woman who had raised her, sacrificed for her, worried about her, had been stealing from her for over 3 years. The worst part wasn't even the money, though nearly $70,000 would have changed her life completely. The worst part was that Carmen had watched her daughter struggle, had seen her work multiple jobs while battling untreated PTSD, had listened to her talk about being on waiting lists for help, all while secretly collecting the very benefits that could have saved her. Pia's phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "Haven't heard from you today, mija. Are you okay? Dinner Sunday as usual." Staring at the message, Pia realized that her war hadn't ended in Afghanistan after all. It had just followed her home, wearing the face of the person she loved most.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Pia didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table until dawn, methodically photographing every document in the manila envelope with her phone, creating a digital trail of evidence. By 6 a.m., she had organized the fraud into a timeline that made her stomach churn with each new revelation. The deception had begun just 3 months after her discharge, when she was still staying with Carmen while apartment hunting. Her mother had insisted on helping with the VA paperwork, saying it was too complicated for Pia to handle while adjusting to civilian life. Pia had trusted her completely, even given her access to important documents for safekeeping. What she hadn't known was that Carmen had been secretly photocopying everything: Pia's DD-214 discharge papers, her social security card, her medical records documenting the PTSD diagnosis she'd received during outprocessing at Fort Hood. Armed with these documents, Carmen had created a perfect forgery of her daughter's identity within the VA system. At 8 a.m., Pia called in sick to all 3 of her jobs. She needed time to think, to plan, to figure out how to confront a betrayal so profound it seemed to defy reality. But first, she needed answers that the VA documents couldn't provide. She drove to First Community Bank, where she'd maintained her checking account since high school. Marcus Williams, the branch manager who'd known her family for years, greeted her with his usual warm smile that faded when he saw her expression. "Pia, what's wrong?" "I need to know if anyone else has tried to access my accounts or open new accounts in my name." Marcus's professional demeanor shifted immediately. He led her to his office and pulled up her records. "Your checking and savings accounts show no unusual activity, but..." He paused, typing rapidly. "There was an attempt to open a credit card in your name about 2 years ago. It was flagged because the address didn't match our records. Someone tried to use an address in the Catalina foothills." Her mother's address. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. "The application was denied," Marcus continued. "We called the phone number on file to verify, and when we couldn't confirm it was you, we blocked it as potential fraud." "Did you notify me?" "We sent a letter to your address on file, the one on Grant Road." The apartment she'd moved out of 3 months before the credit card attempt. Another piece of her mother's careful planning. Timing the fraud for when Pia's mail would be in transition, when notifications would get lost in the shuffle. Pia spent the next hours making calls she never imagined she'd need to make. She contacted the 3 credit bureaus, placing fraud alerts on her accounts. She called the Social Security Administration's fraud hotline.
She even reached out to the Tucson Police Department. Though they told her that benefits fraud was federal jurisdiction, she'd need to work with the VA's Office of Inspector General. By afternoon, sitting in her car in the bank parking lot, Pia made the call she'd been dreading. Her hand shook as she dialed her mother's number. Mija, I was starting to worry. You didn't answer my text last night. Her mother's voice, so familiar, so filled with false concern, made Pia's throat tighten. She had to steady herself against the steering wheel. Mom, I need to ask you something. Have you received any mail for me at your house? Anything from the VA? There was the briefest pause, barely a heartbeat, but Pia had learned in combat to read the silences between words. Just some general information stuff, nothing important. Why? Are you finally getting your benefits approved? About time those bureaucrats did something right. The lie came so smoothly, so naturally. How many times had her mother lied to her face over the past 3 years? How many concerned phone calls had been nothing but performance? I was at the VA yesterday, Pia said, watching her own reflection in the rearview mirror. They told me I've been receiving disability payments since 2021. The silence that followed was different, heavy, charged with everything unspoken. That's wonderful news, Mija. Carmen's voice was too bright, too quick. See, I told you it would all work out. When do you start getting the money? They said it's been going to a Bank of America account for over 3 years now. Another pause, and Pia could almost hear her mother recalculating, trying to figure out what Pia knew and what she could still spin into lies. That must be a mistake, Carmen finally said. You know how the government is, always mixing things up. Remember when they sent your father's death certificate to the wrong address?
Pia closed her eyes. Her mother was still trying to manipulate her, still trying to use family tragedy to deflect from her own crimes. Mom, they have your signature on the paperwork, your address, your bank account number. Pia, you're not making sense. Are you having one of your episodes? Maybe you should come over. Let me make you some tea. Stop, Pia's voice cracked. Just stop lying to me. The silence stretched so long that Pia thought her mother might have hung up. Then Carmen spoke, her voice different now, harder, colder than Pia had ever heard it. Everything I did was for us, for our family. The admission hung in the air like smoke from an explosion. Pia felt tears streaming down her face, but her voice remained steady. For us? I've been working 3 jobs, Mom. I can't afford therapy. I can't sleep. I almost got evicted last month. And you've been taking money meant to help me while watching me suffer? You don't understand what it's like, Carmen shot back. Do you know how hard it was raising you alone? How much I sacrificed? That money was compensation for what I went through too. The worry, the sleepless nights when you were deployed, the stress of having a daughter in a war zone. Pia's hands gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Her mother wasn't just admitting to the fraud, she was justifying it, claiming victimhood even in her betrayal. The VA is investigating. They're treating this as federal fraud. You need to get a lawyer. You wouldn't do this to me, Carmen said, her voice shifting to pleading. I'm your mother. I raised you. You wouldn't destroy our family over money. You destroyed it the moment you forged my signature. I have to go. Pia, wait. She hung up, her hands trembling so badly she could barely hold the phone. In the space of 24 hours, her entire understanding of her life had been rewritten. The mother who had raised her, who she'd trusted above everyone else, was a stranger wearing a familiar face. That evening, Pia sat in a free legal clinic in downtown Tucson, across from a young attorney named Jessica Palmer, who specialized in veterans' rights. Jessica reviewed the documents Pia had brought with a mixture of professional detachment and barely concealed anger. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of benefits fraud I've seen. The good news is that you're clearly the victim here. The bad news is that the legal process is going to be complicated and painful. Your mother will likely face federal charges. Are you prepared for that? Pia thought about 3 years of suffering while her mother pocketed nearly $70,000. She thought about the nightmares she'd endured untreated, the jobs she'd worked until exhaustion, the meals she'd skipped to pay rent. Yes, she said, I'm prepared.
Jessica nodded approvingly. The VA will want full cooperation from you. You'll need to provide evidence of your financial hardship, testimony about your lack of knowledge regarding the payments, and you'll likely need to testify against your mother if this goes to trial. The word testify hit Pia like a physical blow. In court? Against her own mother? But what choice did she have? Carmen had stolen her benefits, her chance at healing, and 3 years of her life. There's something else, Jessica continued. You've mentioned you've been on a waiting list for PTSD treatment. With these fraud charges being filed, the VA might fast-track your actual benefits and treatment. They'll want to demonstrate they're taking care of victims of fraud. For the first time in days, Pia felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. She had come to Phoenix thinking she was getting help and instead discovered betrayal. But maybe somehow this nightmare would lead to the healing she desperately needed. What's my first step? Pia asked. Jessica pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Tomorrow, you file a formal complaint with the VA's Office of Inspector General. I'll help you prepare your statement. Then we wait for them to launch their investigation. In the meantime, we document everything. Every interaction with your mother, every financial hardship you faced, every piece of evidence that proves you were unaware of the fraud. As Pia left the legal clinic that night, walking through downtown Tucson's quiet streets towards her car, she felt the weight of what lay ahead. She would have to relive her trauma, expose her struggles, and testify against the woman who raised her. The war she thought had ended in Afghanistan was evolving into a different kind of battle, one fought in courtrooms and legal documents, where the enemy wore her mother's face. But for the first time since that phone call from Sarah Mitchell, Pia felt something besides shock and pain. She felt the stirrings of determination, the same resolve that had carried her through 2 tours in a combat zone. If she could survive Afghanistan, she could survive this. Her mother had turned her PTSD into a weapon, using Pia's trauma for profit. But Pia was done being a victim. Tomorrow, she would start fighting back.
The Office of Inspector General for the Department of Veterans Affairs occupied a sterile building in downtown Phoenix that looked more like an insurance company than the headquarters of federal law enforcement. Pia arrived 30 minutes early for her 9 a.m. appointment on March 20th, 5 days after discovering the fraud. She sat in her car, rehearsing the statement Jessica Palmer had helped her prepare, her hands gripping a folder containing copies of every shred of evidence. Special Agent Robert Torres greeted her in the lobby, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen too many cases like hers. His handshake was firm, but his smile was genuinely sympathetic. "Ms. Rodriguez, thank you for coming in. I know this isn't easy." They walked through security and into a small conference room where another agent, a woman named Diana Chen, was already setting up a recording device. The formality of it all made Pia's military training kick in. She sat straight-backed, hands folded on the table, ready to give her report like she had countless times after missions in Afghanistan. "This interview will be recorded," Agent Torres explained. "You're not under investigation. You're the complainant and potential victim. But we need to establish a complete timeline of events for our case. Are you ready to begin?" Pia nodded. And for the next 2 hours, she walked them through everything. Her discharge from the Army, her struggle with PTSD, the calls to the VA that went nowhere, her 3 jobs and constant financial hardship, the discovery at Sarah Mitchell's office, the phone call with her mother where Carmen had essentially confessed. Agent Chen took meticulous notes, while Agent Torres asked follow-up questions, his tone always professional but not unkind. When Pia's voice cracked describing how she'd watched her mother's concern for 3 years, never knowing it was all performance, Agent Torres paused the interview and offered her water. "Take your time," he said. "I know this is difficult, but you're doing great." The agents were particularly interested in the timeline of Carmen's access to Pia's documents. When had she been at Carmen's house? What paperwork had her mother helped with? Who else might have known about the fraud? "That's the thing," Pia said, her voice hollow. "I don't think anyone else knew. My mom kept this completely separate from the rest of her life. She still worked part-time at St. Augustine's parish office. She volunteered at the food bank. Everyone thinks she's this selfless single mother who sacrificed everything for her veteran daughter." "And the money?" Agent Torres asked. "Do you have any idea what she spent it on?"
Pia had been thinking about this for days. Her house is paid off. It was paid off when my dad died from his life insurance. She drives the same old Toyota she's had for 10 years. She doesn't take vacations or buy expensive things. She paused, a realization forming. I think she just hoarded it, put it in savings. Maybe she saw it as her retirement fund. Agent Chen stopped typing. Her retirement fund, built on her daughter's suffering. The statement hung in the air, and Pia felt tears threatening again. She blinked them back. After the formal interview concluded, Agent Torres leaned forward, his demeanor shifting slightly from investigator to advisor. Ms. Rodriguez, I need to be straight with you about what happens next. Based on the evidence you've provided and what we have already verified with the VA records, we have enough to move forward with criminal charges against your mother. This is federal fraud. She could face up to 10 years in prison and be required to pay back every penny plus penalties. 10 years. Pia tried to imagine her mother in federal prison and felt sick. But, Torres continued, she's a first-time offender and she's your mother. The U.S. Attorney's Office might offer a plea deal, restitution, probation, house arrest. But that only happens if you're willing to testify. Without your testimony as the victim, the case becomes much harder to prosecute. Are you asking me not to testify? Pia's voice was sharper than she intended. No, Torres said firmly. I'm asking you to understand what you're committing to. This process will take months, maybe over a year. Your mother will likely hire a defense attorney who will try to paint you as complicit or exaggerating your hardship. They might argue you knew about the benefits and are only coming forward now out of spite. Your entire life will be examined. Your medical records, your employment history, your financial situation. And at the end of it all, you'll have to sit in a courtroom and tell a judge or jury how your own mother stole from you while you suffered. Pia absorbed this information, feeling the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. She thought about the easy path, walking away, letting it go, maybe trying to salvage some kind of relationship with Carmen. Her mother was still her mother, the woman who had sung her lullabies and nursed her through childhood illnesses.
But then she thought about the young veterans like her, struggling with invisible wounds, trusting the VA to help them. She thought about every sleepless night she'd endured, every panic attack at work, every time she'd considered whether life was worth living when the nightmares wouldn't stop. And she thought about her mother watching it all, pocketing money meant to heal her daughter's war wounds. I'm testifying, Pia said. Whatever it takes. Agent Torres nodded with what looked like respect. Then we move forward. We'll be in touch within a week about next steps. In the meantime, do not contact your mother except through your attorney. She'll likely try to reach you to convince you to drop this. Don't engage. As if on cue, Pia's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out to see 15 missed calls from Carmen and a series of increasingly desperate text messages. Mija, please call me. We need to talk about this misunderstanding. You're breaking my heart. How can you do this to your own mother? I only did what I thought was best for both of us. Please don't let them destroy our family. Agent Chan saw Kia's expression. Block the number. Let your attorney handle all communication from this point forward. Pia stared at the messages, each one a manipulation disguised as maternal love. With shaking fingers, she blocked her mother's number. It felt like cutting off a limb. The drive back to Tucson was different this time. The desert landscape that usually triggered memories of Afghanistan now seemed to mirror her internal state, harsh, unforgiving, but somehow clarifying. She had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. There was no going back to the relationship she'd had with her mother, even if she wanted to. That relationship had been built on lies. When Pia arrived home, she found a letter taped to her apartment door, handwritten on the cream-colored stationery Carmen always used for special occasions. Her mother must have driven down while Pia was in Phoenix. She sat on her worn couch and opened it with trembling hands. My dearest Pia, I know you're angry, and maybe you have a right to be, but please understand, everything I've ever done has been out of love. When you came back from that terrible place, so broken and lost, I was terrified I'd lose you like I lost your father.
The money from the VA seemed like a small compensation for the years of worry, for the gray hairs you gave me, for the nights I couldn't sleep wondering if you were alive. I was going to tell you eventually, when you were stronger. I was going to give it all to you, set you up properly. Can't you see I was protecting it for you, keeping it safe until you were ready? Please, mija, don't let the government turn you against your own blood. Family is all we have. Your father would be heartbroken to see us like this. Call me. Let's fix this together. Con todo mi amor. Mamá. Pia read the letter 3 times, each reading revealing new layers of manipulation. Her mother was still lying, still twisting the narrative to make herself the victim, the protective parent. The mention of Pia's father, using his memory as emotional leverage, was particularly cruel. She photographed the letter and emailed it to Jessica Palmer with the subject line, "More evidence." That evening, Pia took a step she had been avoiding for 3 years. She called the Veterans Crisis Line. A counselor named Patricia answered, her voice calm and professional. And for the first time, Pia told someone the full truth about her nightmares, her panic attacks, her struggles with wanting to give up. "I need help," Pia said simply. "And now I might finally be able to get it. But first, I have to survive destroying my family." Patricia listened without judgment, then said something that would stay with Pia through all the difficult months ahead. Sometimes the family we're born into isn't our real family. Sometimes our real family is the one we choose, the one that actually protects us instead of exploiting us. After the call, Pia sat in her darkening apartment and made a list of everyone who had truly been there for her since her return. Her battle buddy from Afghanistan, Marcus at the bank who had caught the credit card fraud, Jessica Palmer who was fighting for her pro bono, even Sarah Mitchell at the VA who had cared enough to investigate discrepancies. These people, practical strangers or acquaintances, had shown her more genuine care than her own mother. The next morning, Pia called her employers and quit all 3 jobs. Jessica had advised her that once the VA reinstated her legitimate benefits and she received back payment for the 3 years of fraudulent collection, she'd have enough to live on while focusing on her recovery. More importantly, Agent Torres had fast-tracked her case with the VA Mental Health Services. She had an appointment with a PTSD specialist in 2 days. It was time to stop surviving and start healing. But first, she had to commit fully to the path ahead, knowing it would tear apart everything she had once called family. She texted Jessica, "I'm ready. Whatever evidence they need, whatever testimony they want. Let's do this." The response came quickly. "That's what I wanted to hear. Welcome to the fight." Pia looked around her small apartment, at the life she'd built through sheer, stubborn survival. It was time to burn it all down and build something better from the ashes. Her mother had declared war on her the moment she forged that first signature. Pia was just finally choosing to fight back. There was no retreat from this battlefield. The PTSD therapy sessions started rough. Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, a civilian psychologist who specialized in combat trauma at the Tucson VA clinic, didn't waste time with pleasantries. She was a Nigerian-American woman in her early 40s with an intensity that reminded Pia of her drill sergeants, except Dr. Okonkwo's intensity was focused on healing rather than breaking down. "Your mother's betrayal has compounded your combat trauma," Dr. Okonkwo said during their 3rd session in early April. "You've lost your sense of safety twice, once in Afghanistan when the IED exploded, and again when you discovered the person you trusted most had been exploiting you. We need to work on both wounds simultaneously." The therapy was brutal. Exposure therapy forced Pia to relive the moments she'd spent years trying to forget. The sound of the explosion, Monica Chen's final breath, the smell of burning metal and flesh. But now those memories were tangled with images of her mother's face, her concerned calls that had all been lies, the betrayal that somehow hurt more than the shrapnel scars on her leg. Meanwhile, the investigation accelerated faster than anyone expected. Agent Torres called on April 10th with news that changed everything. "We executed a search warrant on your mother's house this morning," he said, his voice carrying a mix of professionalism and something that sounded like vindication. "We found a safe deposit box key."
The box contained $61,000 in cash, plus detailed records of every fraudulent payment she received. She documented everything, Pia, every single transaction dating back to the first payment. Pia sat down hard on her apartment floor. Why would she keep records? Some fraudsters can't help themselves. They need to track their earnings. But here's the thing. We also found a second set of documents. Your mother has been planning to report the VA for overpayment and was preparing to claim she'd been trying to contact them for years to report their mistake. The audacity took Pia's breath away. Carmen had been preparing a backup plan to pose as the honest citizen trying to return accidentally received money, probably hoping to keep a portion as a finder's fee or administrative compensation. There's more, Torres continued. We interviewed her supervisor at St. Augustine's Parish. Turns out your mother requested reduced hours in 2021, claiming she needed to care for you full-time due to your PTSD. The parish has been paying her a partial salary for family medical leave for 3 years. Carmen had been triple dipping, collecting Pia's VA benefits, maintaining partial pay from the church for supposedly caring for Pia, and accepting sympathy from the community as the devoted mother of a struggling veteran. The scope of the deception was staggering. We're moving forward with formal charges, Torres said. Wire fraud, identity theft, theft of government funds, and making false statements. Your mother is being arrested today. After hanging up, Pia expected to feel satisfaction or vindication. Instead, she felt hollow. She called Jessica Palmer, who had become more friend than attorney over the past weeks. This is actually good news, Jessica said gently. With this much evidence, there's no way this goes to trial. They'll offer a plea deal. Your mother will have to plead guilty, pay restitution, and probably serve some time, but it won't be the full 10 years. How much time? 2 to 3 years, probably. Maybe less with house arrest or work release programs. 2 to 3 years. Pia tried to imagine her mother in prison and couldn't. Despite everything, Carmen was still the woman who had taught her to ride a bike, who had stayed up all night when Pia had pneumonia at age 8, who had driven 6 hours to attend her basic training graduation. The next challenge came from an unexpected direction. On April 15th, Pia received a call from her Aunt Rosa, Carmen's younger sister who lived in Albuquerque. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since a minor disagreement at Christmas 2023. How could you do this to your mother? Rosa's voice was sharp with accusation. She's sitting in jail because of you. She stole almost $70,000 from me while I was suffering. She was keeping it safe. She told me she was going to give it all to you when you were more stable. And now you've called the federales on her like she's some kind of criminal? I felt anger rising. She forged my signature. She committed federal fraud. She is a criminal. She's your mother. Family doesn't destroy family over money. Your father would be ashamed. The mention of her father, the same manipulation Carmen had used, made something snap in Pia. My father would be ashamed of what she did, using her daughter's war trauma for profit. You're going to let her go to prison? Your own mother? She made her choices. I'm making mine. Rosa's voice turned cold. Then you're no longer part of this family. Don't expect anyone to stand by you when this blows up in your face. The call ended with Rosa hanging up on her. Within hours, Pia received texts from cousins she barely knew, from family friends, even from her mother's book club members. Carmen had clearly been working her network, painting herself as the victim of an ungrateful, mentally unstable daughter. The worst message came from Father Miguel at St. Augustine's. I'm praying for both you and Carmen, but I hope you understand what you're doing to a woman who sacrificed everything for you. There's still time to forgive and move forward together.
Even the church was taking Carmen's side. The community that had known Pia her entire life was turning against her, based on her mother's lies. The isolation was crushing. Dr. Okonkwo helped her process the familial rejection during their next session. This is another form of betrayal, the therapist explained. They're choosing a comfortable lie over an uncomfortable truth. Your mother has spent 3 years building a narrative of herself as the devoted, suffering parent. People don't want to believe they've been fooled. So I lose my entire family because I told the truth? You lose people who would rather you suffer in silence than admit they were wrong about someone. That's not really family, Pia. That's just biology. The words echoed what Patricia from the crisis line had said. Pia was learning the painful lesson that DNA didn't guarantee loyalty or love. But the real test came on April 22nd, when Carmen's attorney, a slick defense lawyer named Richard Brennan, requested a meeting with Pia and Jessica. They met in a conference room at Jessica's small law office, where Brennan presented an offer that made Pia's stomach turn. My client is willing to pay back the full amount plus 20% additional compensation, Brennan said smoothly. She'll plead to a misdemeanor, accept probation, and you both can move on with your lives. No trial, no family drama, no mother going to prison. In exchange for what? Jessica asked, her tone icy. Miss Rodriguez signs an affidavit stating she was aware her mother was managing the benefits, but was too mentally unwell to handle them herself. It paints Carmen as an overzealous caregiver who made poor decisions, not a criminal. Pia felt like she'd been slapped. They wanted her to lie, to claim she'd been incompetent, to let her mother walk away with barely a slap on the wrist while destroying her own credibility. Absolutely not, Pia said. Brennan leaned forward. Miss Rodriguez, think carefully. If this goes to trial, your entire life will be exposed. Your mental health records, your suicide attempt in 2022. I never attempted suicide, Pia interrupted. No. What about the night of July 18th, 2022, when emergency services were called to your apartment? Pia's blood ran cold. That had been a severe panic attack where a neighbor had overreacted and called 911. She'd never even gone to the hospital. You're going to twist everything, she said quietly. I'm going to present the facts, Brennan replied. A mentally unstable veteran, unable to manage her own affairs, now turning on the mother who tried to help her. The jury will see a troubled young woman lashing out at the person who cared for her most. Jessica stood abruptly. This meeting is over. We'll see you in court, Mr. Brennan. After Brennan left, Pia sat trembling. He's going to destroy me, make me look crazy. He's going to try, Jessica said firmly. But we have the truth, the evidence, and federal investigators who believe you. This is exactly what I warned you about. They'll attack your credibility because it's all they have. The question is, can you withstand it? That night, alone in her apartment, Pia faced her darkest moment yet. The panic attacks were getting worse despite therapy. Her family had abandoned her. The defense was preparing to paint her mentally unfit. And her mother was still claiming victimhood, still manipulating everyone around her. She stood on her small balcony looking out at the Tucson lights and felt the weight of the battle ahead. This was different from Afghanistan. There, the enemy was clear, the mission defined. Here, she was fighting shadows and lies, with her own credibility as the battlefield. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Jake Morrison, your squad leader from B Company. Torres contacted me about testifying on your character. I'm in. Whatever you need, Rodriguez. We don't leave our people behind. More texts followed over the next hour. Other veterans from her unit, people she hadn't spoken to in years, all contacted by Agent Torres, all willing to testify about the Pia they knew, the competent medic, the soldier they'd trusted with their lives. Pia realized that while Carmen had been building a fortress of lies, the truth had been quietly building its own army. She wasn't alone in this fight, after all. She texted Jake back. Thank you. It means everything. His response was immediate. Same team, Rodriguez. Always. For the first time since the investigation began, Pia smiled. The first trial had been enduring the attacks on her character and watching her family choose lies over truth. But she had passed it. She was still standing, and she had allies. Real ones, who chose to stand with her not out of obligation, but out of genuine respect and loyalty. The battle was far from over, but she was ready for the next phase.
May brought revelations that cut deeper than Pia had imagined possible. The federal investigation, now in full swing, began uncovering layers of deception that extended far beyond stolen benefits. Agent Torres requested another meeting, this time bringing a forensic accountant named Margaret Liu who had been analyzing Carmen's financial records. "We need to show you something," Torres said, spreading bank statements across the conference table. "Your mother didn't just steal VA benefits. The pattern goes back much further than we initially thought." Margaret pointed to highlighted entries dating back to 2018, before Pia had even been discharged. "Your father's Social Security survivor benefits. After he died, you were entitled to dependent benefits until you turned 18. But these records show payments continued until you were 21, while you were in the Army." Pia's throat tightened. "That's impossible. I was self-sufficient by then." "Exactly," Margaret continued. "Your mother reported to Social Security that you were still a full-time student living at home, disabled and dependent on her care. She collected those benefits for 3 additional years, approximately $28,000. The room spun. Carmen's fraud hadn't begun with Pia's PTSD. It had started the moment there was an opportunity to profit from her daughter's existence. "There's more," Torres added grimly. "We found applications for disaster relief after the 2019 floods claiming damages to a property you supposedly owned. We found medical insurance claims for treatments you never received. Your mother has been using your identity as a tool for fraud for at least 6 years." Jessica Palmer, who had been taking notes furiously, looked up. "This changes everything. This isn't a desperate mother making a bad decision. This is a pattern of calculated fraud using her daughter as a vehicle." Dr. Okonkwo helped Pia process these revelations in their next therapy session. "Your mother didn't start stealing because of your PTSD. She started stealing because she saw you as an asset to exploit. The PTSD just gave her a bigger opportunity." The realization was devastating. Pia had been questioning whether she'd somehow driven her mother to this desperate act by being broken, by being a burden. Now she understood. Carmen had been exploiting her long before Afghanistan, perhaps even seeing Pia's military service as a future investment rather than a sacrifice to fear. "She was glad when I enlisted," Pia said slowly, pieces clicking into place. "It was strange. Most mothers cry when their kids join the military. She helped me pack. She seemed excited." Dr. Okonkwo nodded sadly. She was investing in future returns. The deeper Pia dug into her past with this new perspective, the more disturbing patterns emerged. She remembered Carmen insisting on being the contact person for her life insurance beneficiary, the way her mother had helped with her TSP retirement contributions, having access to all her military financial information. Even Carmen's enthusiasm about Pia deploying to a combat zone suddenly took on a sinister undertone. Higher danger pay, combat bonuses, potential disability benefits. In early May, Pia received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. Rebecca Sandoval, an investigative reporter for the Arizona Daily Star, had gotten wind of the case through court filings and wanted to tell Pia's story. "This isn't just about you," Rebecca explained over coffee at Pia's kitchen table. "We've been investigating VA benefits fraud, and your case represents something bigger: family members exploiting veterans who are already vulnerable." Pia was hesitant. The last thing she wanted was publicity. But Rebecca showed her preliminary research that made her reconsider. "We've identified at least 12 similar cases in Arizona alone in the past 5 years. Parents, spouses, even adult children stealing benefits from disabled veterans. The VA system has gaps that people like your mother exploit. Your case could change policies, protect other veterans." The idea that speaking out could prevent this from happening to others resonated with Pia's military training. Complete the mission, protect your fellow soldiers. But going public meant exposing everything, making her private trauma a matter of public record. "I need to think about it," Pia said. Jessica Palmer was surprisingly supportive when Pia called her. "Actually, public pressure might work in our favor. The U.S. Attorney's Office is more likely to push for serious prison time if there's media attention on the case. And it might shut down your mother's victim narrative if the public knows the truth." But that same week brought a crushing blow from a different direction. Pia's landlord, Mr. Chen, knocked on her door with an apologetic expression and an eviction notice.
I'm so sorry, Pia, but I got a call from someone claiming to be your healthcare provider, saying you're a danger to yourself and others. They said you've been making threats, that you're unstable. I have other tenants to think about.
The lies were escalating. Carmen, or someone working on her behalf, was actively trying to destroy Pia's life, not just defend against charges. When Pia proved the call was fraudulent and Mr. Chen rescinded the eviction, she realized this was psychological warfare. The attacks became more sophisticated. Someone created a fake Facebook profile for Pia, posting rambling, incoherent messages about government conspiracies and making threats against VA officials. The profile was reported and removed, but not before dozens of people Pia knew had seen it. "This is witness intimidation," Agent Torres said when she reported it. "We can add charges, but we need to prove who's behind it." The stress was affecting Pia's recovery. Dr. Okonkwo noted increased anxiety, disrupted sleep patterns, and signs of re-traumatization. "Your mother isn't just fighting the legal case," the therapist observed. "She's waging a campaign to break you, to make you drop the charges." The breaking point came on May 18th. Pia arrived at the VA clinic for her therapy appointment to find she'd been removed from Dr. Okonkwo's patient list. Someone had called, claiming to be Pia, and canceled all future appointments, stating she was moving out of state. When the confusion was sorted out, Pia sat in her car in the parking lot and screamed. The rage that had been building for weeks finally erupted. Carmen wasn't just stealing money. She was sabotaging Pia's healing, trying to prove her incompetent, trying to isolate her from every support system. That evening, Pia called Rebecca Sandoval. "I'll do the interview, but I want to control the narrative. I want people to know exactly what she did, how she did it, and how the system failed to protect me." Rebecca's article ran on May 25th with the headline, "Combat Veteran Battles New Enemy. Mother Who Stole Her Benefits While She Suffered." The piece was comprehensive, detailing the fraud, the family betrayal, and the systemic failures that allowed it to happen. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Local news stations picked up the story, veterans advocacy groups reached out offering support. Donations poured into a GoFundMe that Pia hadn't authorized but learned was started by Jake Morrison and her old Army unit. But the attention also brought Carmen's defenders out in force. Local community members who knew her mother organized a counter-campaign, painting Carmen as a devoted mother being persecuted by a mentally ill daughter. They held a prayer vigil outside St. Augustine's, raising money for Carmen's legal defense. The battle lines were drawn publicly now. Pia watched news coverage showing her Aunt Rosa crying on camera about family betrayal, while simultaneously reading supportive messages from veterans she'd never met who understood what she was going through. "You've opened Pandora's box," Jessica told her. "There's no going back to private resolution now. This is going to trial, and it's going to be brutal." Pia looked at the messages of support on her phone, mixed with hateful comments from strangers who believed Carmen's narrative. The deeper she went into this fight, the more complex it became. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. It was about challenging a system that allowed vulnerable veterans to be exploited, about exposing the dark side of family obligation, about redefining what loyalty and love actually meant. In her therapy session that week, Dr. Okonkwo asked a question that cut to the heart of everything. "What do you need from this process, Pia? What would justice actually look like for you?" Pia thought about the money, the prison time, the public vindication, but beneath all of that was something simpler and more profound. She said, "I need people to know the truth, not just about what my mother did, but about what it's like to come home broken and have the people who should protect you exploit that brokenness instead. I need other veterans to know they're not alone, and I need to know that I'm strong enough to survive this without becoming as broken as she wanted me to be." Dr. Okonkwo nodded slowly. "Then we need to make sure you survive this intact, because the hardest part is still ahead." Pia knew she was right. The case was heading toward trial.
Carmen's defense was getting more aggressive, and every day brought new attacks disguised as concern or family loyalty. She was descending deeper into a battle that seemed to have no bottom, each revelation more painful than the last. But somewhere in that descent, Pia was also discovering reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed. The war had taught her to survive in hostile territory. Now she was learning to survive in hostile family territory, and finding that the principles were surprisingly similar. Trust your squad, complete the mission. Never surrender to the enemy, even when the enemy wears your mother's face.
June arrived with a heat that felt personal, and with it came the collapse of everything Pia had been building toward. The crisis began not with a bang, but with a phone call from Jessica Palmer, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Pia, we have a problem. A big one." Carmen's defense team had filed a motion to dismiss based on newly discovered evidence, medical records from 2020 showing that Pia had signed a general power of attorney, giving Carmen the right to handle her financial affairs. The document appeared legitimate, notarized, and filed with the county recorder's office, dated 2 months before the first fraudulent VA claim. "I never signed that," Pia said, her voice hollow, but even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Those first months after her discharge were a blur of pain and confusion. Could she have signed something without remembering? Jessica arranged an emergency meeting with a handwriting expert, Dr. Philip Tan, who examined the signature under magnification. His conclusion was devastating. "The signature is consistent with Miss Rodriguez's handwriting patterns. I cannot definitively say it's a forgery." "But I don't remember signing it," Pia insisted, feeling her world crumbling. Dr. Tan looked sympathetic. "Memory gaps are common with PTSD, Miss Rodriguez. The document was filed during a period when you were, by your own admission, struggling significantly with your mental health." The defense team immediately leaked this to the media. Within hours, headlines shifted. Veterans' fraud claims against mother questioned after legal documents surface. And did PTSD cause veteran to forget authorizing mother's financial control? The veterans groups that had rallied behind Pia grew quiet. The online support that had sustained her began to waver. Even Jake Morrison sent a careful text, "Still with you, but what's this about the power of attorney?" In therapy, Dr. Okonkwo worked through the possibility that Pia might have signed it during a dissociative episode or severe anxiety attack. "Whether you remember it or not doesn't change the fact that your mother exploited your vulnerable state," the therapist said, but the legal case just got significantly more complicated. Agent Torres was blunt when they met. If that power of attorney is legitimate, it creates reasonable doubt about the fraud charges. Your mother can claim she was acting under your legal authorization, even if she exceeded the scope of that authority. So she wins? Pia felt numb. Not necessarily, but the U.S. attorney is reconsidering the case. They might offer a much lighter plea deal or even drop the criminal charges entirely, leaving you to pursue civil remedies instead. The prospect of Carmen walking away with minimal consequences after everything she'd done was unbearable. But worse was coming. On June 10th, Carmen's attorney, Richard Brennan, appeared on a local news program, painting a picture that made Pia's blood run cold. This is a tragic case of a mother trying to help her severely mentally ill daughter, who then turned on her when her PTSD-induced paranoia took hold. "We have documentation showing Miss Rodriguez gave her mother full legal authority to manage her finances, which Carmen did responsibly for years. Now, influenced by opportunistic lawyers and seeking media attention, this troubled young woman is destroying the mother who sacrificed everything for her." The narrative was shifting. Carmen was no longer the thief. She was the victim of a mentally unstable daughter's delusions. The power of attorney was the weapon that could destroy everything Pia had fought for. Then came the personal crisis that nearly broke her completely. On June 15th, Pia arrived home to find her apartment had been broken into. Nothing was stolen, but someone had gone through everything. Her military photos were scattered across the floor, including pictures of her unit in Afghanistan. Written across one photo of her with Sergeant Staff Sergeant Monica Chen was a message in red marker: "Heroes don't betray their families."
The violation felt worse than any physical attack. The police report was filed, but there was no evidence pointing to who had done it. Pia spent the night at a cheap motel, unable to stay in the apartment that no longer felt safe. Jessica found her there the next morning, disheveled and barely coherent from lack of sleep. "We need to talk about worst-case scenarios," the attorney said gently. "If the U.S. attorney drops the criminal case, you can still file a civil lawsuit for the return of the money. But what?" Pia's voice was dead. "Civil cases have a lower burden of proof, but they also don't result in prison time. Your mother could potentially repay the money over time and walk away, and civil litigation could take years and cost more than you'd recover."
Everything Pia had sacrificed, her family, her community standing, her privacy, her sense of safety, was potentially for nothing. Carmen might face no real consequences, might continue living her life while Pia remained broken and isolated. The breaking point came on June 18th at a hearing where Brennan argued for dismissal of charges. Pia sat in the courtroom, watching her mother play the role of victimized parent to perfection. Carmen dabbed at tears, clutched her Bible, and looked at Pia with an expression of wounded love that made Pia want to scream. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s, listened to both arguments before making a ruling that sent shockwaves through Pia's world. Given the existence of the power of attorney and questions about the defendant's awareness of its implications at the time of signing, I'm granting the motion to dismiss the federal fraud charges. However, the theft of government funds charge will proceed, as that crime doesn't require proof of lack of consent. The trial will focus solely on whether Mrs. Rodriguez improperly used funds that were legally obtained under authorized power of attorney. It was a technicality that gutted the heart of the case. Carmen could potentially argue she was just poorly managing funds she was legally entitled to manage, turning massive fraud into mere financial mismanagement. Pia walked out of the courtroom in a daze. Outside, Carmen's supporters applauded, calling it a victory for family values. Someone shouted at Pia, "You should be ashamed destroying your mother like this." Jessica tried to be optimistic. "We can still prove she stole the money, even if we can't prove the original power of attorney was fraud." "She's going to walk away," Pia interrupted. "After everything she did, she's going to walk away." That night, sitting alone in her apartment that still felt violated, Pia stared at the bottle of sleeping pills her doctor had prescribed. The label warned against taking more than one. She counted out 10 pills, then 20, then the whole bottle, 30 small white tablets that could end the pain, the humiliation, the endless battle against someone who seemed to always be one step ahead. Her phone buzzed, a text from Dr. Okonkwo, who must have heard about the hearing. "Remember, Pia, the darkest hour is just before dawn. Don't make permanent decisions based on temporary defeats. Call me anytime." Pia looked at the pills in her hand, then at her phone. Another text came through, this time from Jake Morrison. "Heard about the hearing. Total bullshit. But we've been in tougher spots, Rodriguez. Remember Kandahar? We didn't quit then. Don't quit now." More messages followed. Other veterans from her unit, people she'd saved in the field, fellow soldiers who had seen her at her strongest and her most vulnerable. Each message a lifeline thrown from across the distance. Pia poured the pills down the toilet, watching them swirl away. She called Dr. Okonkwo, who answered on the first ring despite it being nearly midnight. "She's winning!" Pia sobbed into the phone. "She's destroying me and she's winning!" "She hasn't won yet," Dr. Okonkwo said firmly. "You're still standing. That means you're still in the fight. The question isn't whether you've lost. The question is whether you're going to let her take your life too." Through the crisis, through the collapse of the legal case and the violation of her home and the crumbling of her hope, Pia found something she hadn't expected, the absolute bottom. And at the bottom, there was nowhere to go but up. The next morning, she called Jessica Palmer with a voice that was different, harder, colder, more determined than before. What would it take to prove that power of attorney was forged,
even if the handwriting expert can't confirm it. Jessica was quiet for a moment. We'd need to prove you were in a state where you couldn't have legally consented. Medical records showing severe impairment on that specific date, witnesses who saw you in crisis, anything that demonstrates you lacked capacity. Then let's find it. Dig deeper. I don't care how personal it gets or what it costs me. She almost won, Jessica. She almost broke me completely. Now I want to break her case apart piece by piece. The crisis had nearly destroyed Pia, but it had also burned away the last remnants of the daughter who still hoped for reconciliation, who still wanted to believe the best about her mother. What emerged from the ashes was a soldier again, battle-hardened, strategically minded, and absolutely committed to victory at any cost. The darkest moment had passed, but the real war was just beginning.
The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, a journal Pia didn't even remember keeping. Jessica's paralegal, while organizing evidence boxes in early July, found a composition notebook buried among Pia's military discharge papers. Inside were entries dating from September to November 2020. Written in Pia's handwriting, but barely legible, the words sprawling and disjointed. September 12, 2020. Can't stop shaking. Mom says I should rest. Everything is too loud. Why is everything so loud? September 28, 2020. Didn't leave bed today, or yesterday. Mom brought soup. Can't eat. Monica keeps calling my name, but she's dead. She's dead. She's dead. October 7th, 2020. Mom says doctors are expensive. Says I don't need them. She's right. I'm just weak. Dad wouldn't recognize me. I'm broken. The entry stopped abruptly on November 3rd, 2020, 2 days before the supposed power of attorney was signed. The final entry was barely coherent. Ceiling fan sounds like helicopter blades. Can't breathe. Want to stop existing. Dr. Okonkwo reviewed the journal with Pia during their next session, her expression grave. This documents severe psychological distress. Someone in this state couldn't provide informed consent for legal documents. This is evidence of incapacity. But the real breakthrough came when Pia read one entry more carefully. October 15th, 2020. Mom took me to notary today. Signed papers for my own good. Couldn't read them. Letters kept moving. She said, trust her. I always trust her. Pia's hands trembled. I was there. I did sign something, but I couldn't even read what it was. Jessica immediately filed a motion to introduce the journal as evidence, along with expert testimony about PTSD-induced cognitive impairment. The journal entries painted a picture of someone in severe psychological crisis, unable to make informed decisions, exactly the vulnerability Carmen had exploited. The second breakthrough came from Agent Torres, who had never stopped investigating. On July 20th, he called with news that changed everything. We found the notary who witnessed the power of attorney's signature, Linda Martinez. She works at a UPS store in Tucson. She remembers your mother bringing in a young woman who seemed out of it. Her words. She said the woman, you, could barely hold the pen steady and seemed confused about what she was signing. Why didn't she refuse to notarize it? Pia asked. She said your mother was very persuasive, claimed you were on medication for anxiety, that it was normal. But here's the important part. Linda kept a logbook. She noted concerns about your mental state, worried she might get in trouble for notarizing under questionable circumstances. That logbook is evidence that you were visibly impaired. Linda Martinez agreed to testify. Combined with the journal, Pia's medical records from the VA showing her condition in 2020, and Dr. Okonkwo's expert testimony about trauma-induced incapacity, the case transformed overnight. The U.S. Attorney's Office, embarrassed by their hasty dismissal of charges, moved to reinstate the full fraud case. Judge Morrison, presented with the new evidence, reversed her previous ruling. The court finds sufficient evidence to question the validity of the power of attorney given the documented mental state of the plaintiff at the time of signing. All original charges are reinstated. Carmen's confident facade finally cracked.
On August 3rd, with trial set to begin in 2 weeks, her attorney requested a meeting to discuss a plea agreement. Richard Brennan looked defeated as he sat across from Pia and Jessica. My client is willing to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for a recommendation of 5 years with possibility of parole after 3, full restitution of all funds, including the Social Security fraud, and a formal public apology. Pia looked at Jessica, who nodded slightly. We want more, Pia said. She allows for victim impact statements for me. She admits publicly that she exploited my PTSD deliberately, and she pays for my therapy for the next 5 years. Brennan consulted with Carmen, who sat in the corner looking smaller than Pia had ever seen her. When he returned, he simply nodded. Agreed. The sentencing hearing on August 28, 2024, was standing room only. Media packed the courtroom, veterans advocates filled the gallery, and Carmen's few remaining supporters sat in silent witness to the woman's downfall. When it was Pia's turn to give her victim impact statement, she walked to the podium with steady hands. Looking directly at her mother for the first time in months, she spoke. When I was in Afghanistan, I knew who the enemy was. I knew what I was fighting for. Coming home, I thought the war was over. I was wrong. The enemy was waiting for me here, wearing my mother's face, using my trauma as a weapon against me. Carmen Rodriguez didn't just steal money, she stole my chance to heal. She watched me suffer, encouraged my isolation, and profited from my pain. She used my PTSD, a wound I received serving my country, as her personal ATM machine. And when I discovered the truth, she tried to destroy my credibility, my sanity, and my life.
But she failed, because unlike her, I'm not alone. I have fellow veterans who stood by me. I have advocates who believed me. I have a strength she couldn't break, no matter how hard she tried. I don't forgive her. I may never forgive her. But I'm free of her now, free to heal, free to rebuild a life that isn't built on her lies. That's my victory. Carmen was given the opportunity to speak. She stood, trembling, and faced her daughter. Pia, I'm sorry. I told myself I was protecting the money for you, that I deserved compensation for my suffering as a military mother. But the truth is, I was selfish. I was greedy. I saw an opportunity and I took it, and I justified it by convincing myself of my own sacrifices. I destroyed our relationship, betrayed your trust, and hurt you in ways I can never repair. I'm sorry. The apology felt hollow to Pia, but it was on record, undeniable proof that Carmen admitted her deliberate exploitation. Judge Morrison sentenced Carmen to 5 years in federal prison, ordered full restitution of $94,492, including the Social Security fraud, and mandated that Carmen could never again have power of attorney over anyone while on probation after release. As marshals led Carmen away, she looked back at Pia one final time. There was no maternal love in that look, no regret, just the cold assessment of a con artist who had finally been caught. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Pia read a brief, prepared statement. Today, justice was served not just for me, but for all veterans whose families have exploited their service and sacrifice. The VA has promised policy changes to prevent this kind of fraud. I hope my story will encourage other victims to come forward, to know they're not alone, and to understand that speaking the truth, no matter how painful, is always worth it. Rebecca Sandoval's follow-up article ran with the headline, Combat Veteran Wins Battle Against Mother Who Weaponized Her PTSD. The story detailed not just the case resolution, but the systemic changes it sparked. The VA implementing new verification procedures for power of attorney documents, mandatory interviews with veterans themselves before benefits are released, and a dedicated fraud hotline. 3 months later, in November 2024, Pia sat in Dr. Okonkwo's office for what would be their final regular session. You've come an extraordinary distance, the therapist said. When you first came to me, you were drowning. Now look at you. Pia smiled, a real smile, something that had become easier lately.
I'm not healed. The nightmares still come sometimes, but I'm managing them. I'm living instead of just surviving. What's next for you? Pia had been thinking about this. I'm going back to school, emergency medicine. I want to be a paramedic, maybe eventually a physician's assistant. I'm good at helping people in crisis. I just need to learn to do it outside a war zone. She'd also reconnected with her Army unit, attended a reunion where Jake Morrison had lifted her in a bear hug that made her ribs creak. She'd started a support group for veterans dealing with family betrayal, finding purpose in helping others navigate similar pain. The money from the restitution had been placed in a trust managed by Jessica, ensuring Pia's financial security while she focused on education and healing. Carmen was serving her sentence at FCI Victorville in California. They had no contact, and Pia intended to keep it that way. One evening in December 2024, when Tucson's winter brought blessed relief from the heat, Pia stood on her new apartment balcony, a better place in a safer neighborhood. She thought about everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. She'd lost a mother, but gained a clearer understanding of what family really meant. She'd lost her innocence about trust, but gained the wisdom to recognize who deserved it. She'd lost 3 years to theft and betrayal, but gained a strength she never knew she possessed. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jake. "Unit's planning a memorial hike for Monica next month. You in?" Pia typed back, "Absolutely, wouldn't miss it." As she looked over the city lights, Pia realized the war, both overseas and at home, had changed her forever. The scars would always remain, physical and psychological, but she was no longer defined by those scars or by the people who had caused them. Carmen Rodriguez had tried to make Pia's PTSD her own personal profit center, had weaponized her daughter's trauma for financial gain. But in the end, Pia had transformed that pain into purpose, that betrayal into advocacy, that darkness into determination. The battle was brutal, the casualties severe, the victory hard-won. But Pia Rodriguez had survived both Afghanistan and the war that followed her home. She had faced down the enemy in her own family and emerged stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next. She was a soldier still, but now she was fighting for herself, for her healing, and for a future that was finally, blessedly, her own. The war was over. The real life could begin. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.